Thank you very much. My name is Daniel Rangadi Musako, an SA artist from the Department of Information Science. I just need to say thanks for the digital representation, actually, and the digital application at hand. I think the ridiculously expensive artworks, as Prof. Sia says, that will remain existent because of is a book maker's world. However, I'm currently placed in a library where I'm seeing many archive artifacts that cannot see the light of day because they are so fragile. So digital application is good that we can use it there. The only thing that is a hindrance at the moment is the copyright and the patent idea of the producer. So we cannot just duplicate them so that they can be on display to be seen. However, if at all I need to protect that copyright clauses and legislation, can I, through the system, type a text and made the system print it, interpret it into an art form that I can put it on display? That means when I read archival material, I see that they need to be on display, then I can type it, and the system or the tool that you presented design an artwork in that line, and I monitor and guide it. Is that possible?
Thanks for the question. Just for clarity, are you asking if there is a software that you can type text to 3D form? There are a lot of AI softwares that do that. From my experience, it's not that effective. It's from a point of understanding the integrity of what a digital model is and needs to be. What often is done is there's a form of digital making that's photogrammetry, which is creating that digital form through a room surrounded by cameras or from multiple photos. So a lot of the time, these text to 3D form applications build what looks a lot more detailed than what the actual model is. So if it's for example, if it's an application of just needing to see an idea of an archival piece of material, an artifact, then it might be an effective technology to use for that. But if you need it to be a very accurate model representing exactly what that was, it at this stage is not effective.
Okay, thanks so much, Jonathan, for that. Please put your hands together for Jonathan. Thanks for that presentation. Okay, perfect. Now we move on to our next speaker. Still with NMU, it's my pleasure to invite Karabo to the front, and he's going to talk about doing artificial intelligence research in the humanities. Picking up from our conversations yesterday, Karabo, you've got about 15 minutes for your presentation. Please come through. You don't have a presentation? No presentation. PowerPoint.
It's there.
Okay, you can use that.
Am I on TV? Oh, there we go. This is not working. Oh. Okay. All right. Thank you so much. Good morning, colleagues. It's always difficult to present after Jonathan because he's got fun techie stuff, and my work is a little bit more theory. I think I wanted to start first by commenting on ethics and artificial intelligence in the creative sector. There's a report that was commissioned last year that we wrote with South African Cultural Observatory. I think it's now online on the Department of Arts and Culture website. It tries to answer some of the issues about the creative sector and artificial intelligence. So thank you for the invitation, colleagues at UNISA, for having us here. My name is Karabo Maiyane. I'm a researcher in ethics of artificial intelligence, and I'm a lecturer of philosophy at Nelson Mandela University. So today I'll be giving a brief reflection on conducting AI research in the humanities. I don't know if you've noticed from the many presentations that we've had so far, most of the conversations that happen in this discourse seem to happen within the IT space, the engineering space, and in many instances it's difficult to find expression as to how they relate to the humanities. So I hope by sharing this experience with you about the research that I'm doing, that I will highlight the importance of the humanities in the digital era that we find ourselves in, and how we still, as the humanities, remain the custodians of knowledge production, even in different domains. So I will first outline my research, generally what I'm working on in my research space, highlight the relevance of it in terms of the humanities, and particularly the digital humanities, and then make some recommendations in terms of how we can move forward. So my research focuses mostly on the impact technology has in terms of human relations. One of the questions that I always aim to answer is under which conditions do various AI technologies have an impact on human dignity? And I also realize that every time I ask this question, there's a presupposition that there's a relationship between human beings, human dignity, and the impact of technology. I affirm this type of danger, and I say one of the measures with which we can look into the impact of artificial intelligence technologies and how we can regulate them is to use dignity as one of the measures that can be used to create frameworks around it. So I agree that they exist, and my research is mostly theoretically on the one hand and then practically. On the theoretical is the conceptual clarifications of some of the ideas that emerge in terms of what we speak about in artificial intelligence, and then the separate technologies that exist in different domains and what their impact are to human interactions. The concept of dignity is one that I would like to imagine is familiar to everybody. Am I still audible? Am I still on TV? Sabotage. The idea of dignity. I think the idea of dignity is something that is, I imagine, familiar to everybody. By show of hands, who knows what dignity is? So we all are familiar with what dignity is. Okay, what is it? What is dignity? You raise your hand first. Yes, you. What is dignity? This is the one value that in many instances that we speak about, we assume to have an understanding of the meaning of. However, if you pay specific attention to the conversations about dignity and how it's used in multiple conceptions, it tends to mean different things depending on their usages. In many instances, people speak about dignity as a value that human beings have. Whether it's intrinsic or extrinsic is under debate, but this is a value that exists that human beings have. Some people speak about it as a question of status, something that one has on the basis of something else. For example, if I'm a human being, I have an intrinsic value because of certain capacities that gives me this dignity. But if I'm a professor, I have a merit because of the work that I've done in a specific field that gives me this dignity. Notice that to be a professor, you need to be confirmed as a professor by a specific institution that you work in. The moment you leave that institution, you lose that title, unless if the next institution guarantees it. So dignity in that regard is a status. It means it's something that can be had, but it's also something that can be lost. But dignity as a value, which is how I want to define dignity in the context of how we use it for evaluation, It's a value, and it's not just a value, it's an intrinsic value that we have as human beings because we have some capacity. So you're not just a human being with dignity. You're a human being, and based on your capacity to do one thing or the other, then you have dignity. Your capacity to consciously make decisions and be a moral agent gives you that capacity. Your notion of relationality gives you that capacity. Being able to be an acceptable member of a community provides you dignity in specific communities. So it is these individual capacities or a collection of them that provides you an intrinsic value. And why we insist on the notion of intrinsic is because a value that is intrinsic is a value that cannot be monetized or quantified. You have it, and because of we all have it, we have it in equal measure. Right. But why do we then want to think about dignity in terms of artificial intelligence research and use it as a framework in terms of governing the policy? One of the main reasons for that, which is most important, is the fact that given that it's an intrinsic value, and given that it's an intrinsic value that most human beings have, it is a value that we can use to protect the interest of human beings without necessarily compromising human beings. So if we use it as a strict measure, and we say this is a measure that we all have, and because of it, it's intrinsic to everybody, and because it's distributed on equal measure for everybody that has it, then we can use that as a measuring stick in terms of how we interact with multiple technologies. So if we agree to this, then we can evaluate the impact of technologies in different domains, be it generative AI, be it robotics, be it the next advent of artificial intelligence that is spoken of now in greater heights, agential artificial intelligence. Some people call it super intelligence, and all those measures where they say the capacity of artificial intelligence has the possibility of surpassing the intelligence of human being to having an intelligence of its own. We can still use it as a measure. So I investigate in my study 2 domains of applications. One is human-robot interactions. This speaks about instruments that, how do you do this? Yes, instruments that we use as human beings for specific purposes. All of us, as we're sitting here, some of us are looking at our laptops. I'm hoping you're making notes and not answering emails. But a laptop is an instrument that has specific capacities that you use, and because of it as an instrument that you use, how you use it and how it impacts you depends on how you want to use it. And at any point where it upsets you, you can switch it off, you can buy another one and whatnot. So those are instrumental capacities of artificial intelligence. And then there's agential ones, which speaks about the claims, and I will display it in a minute, that these technologies can go beyond being instruments and hold some kind of statuses. So in terms of human-robot interaction, which is the instrumental use of these capacities, as it pertains to human dignity, because of these technologies are instruments, their impact in terms of human dignity is not as great because we use them on the basis of how we need to use them. A laptop is a simple example. If you look at the healthcare sector, which is the picture that I've displayed here, these are robotics that are used in elder care, such as lifting robots. That one on that side is Pero. It's a companion robot. It's a robot that you can buy. It's like a pet, and then you can pet it, and then it makes nice sounds. It's nice and warm. So there's been serious research that has shown that engaging with these technologies, especially for patients with dementia and Alzheimer's and whatnot, they're able to have the companion and interaction needs that they have without necessarily endangering the agents that they would need. Somebody with extreme dementia might not be able to take care of a pet, but might have such an instrument that they use to kind of get the same kind of release that they would have gotten from an interaction with a pet. So in those kind of situations, these are assistive technologies that we can make use of for the purposes that vary from person to person. Generative AI for students, companion robotics, support robotics for patients, and they vary from person to person. A clicker for me to give this presentation in a microphone. All of them are instruments. At any point where the microphone stops working, I can still stand here and speak. So it doesn't affect my dignity. The other one that is complicated is autonomous moral agents. The most popular ones that is spoken about is autonomous weapon systems. Most people know it as killer robots, I think. There's also an invention of sex robotics. There's an invention of self-driving cars. I think one of the first companies to do this was Waymo some time ago. It has since grown now. One of the biggest leaders in this terms of this conversation now is Tesla, which I did not show for political reasons. So now, when it comes to these technologies and dignity, it becomes interesting now and it becomes tricky because by the claim of the conception of them, there's a lot of things that it starts to imply. Autonomous moral agent, by definition now, is a status that is only allowed to human beings for the simple reasons that human beings can consider, judge, and make decisions. So they have the cognitive capacities to will themselves from one action to the other. Right. So if you say a technology is autonomous, like an autonomous weapon system, because it can be programmed, a function, and have a time lag, and in that time lag it can implement that decision. That way of functioning is called intention. So these technologies, most of them, have some capacity of intention. But having intention is not the same as having intentionality, for example. Having intention means you can be instructed and will yourself towards that instruction. Having intentionality means you can have an intention and will yourself against that instruction. So an autonomous weapon system, for example, for me, would be only autonomous if at some point you give it an instruction to kill and it says no. But before then, all it has is intention. But if we do accept that they have moral agency, then it means whatever it is that moral agents have as their desserts, it's the things that we must ascribe to them. So what makes it complicated in terms of evaluating these technologies and human dignity is that human beings, like I've said already, have dignity because they are moral agents, because they have the capacity for rationality, they have the capacity for relationality. Now, when we say artificial moral agents have the capacity for autonomy, it means then they can have dignity. If they can have dignity, then it means they have the same desserts that entities with dignity have. So then we start having conversations about robots having rights. We start having conversations about how we should treat robots, and that complicates the moral structure of society. Whether the complication is acceptable or not, that's subject to debate. That's not the point. The point is, the moment we have conceptual clarity about what we mean by autonomous moral agency, then we can start thinking of the types of desserts that we need to ascribe these types of technologies. This is my research, colleagues, and it looks at these types of conversations from an ethical point of view of how these technologies that we interact with, either the current technologies that we have or the aspirant technologies that will be created. And I use dignity as a measure to look at how we can evaluate and interact with them. For the digital humanities, what this means for us is that we should look at how AI is revolutionizing all of these systems. And I think the one thing that I enjoyed about this whole session here was to learn and to highlight that artificial intelligence is not the only domain of application that exists. Yesterday we had conversations about Web3, which is IoT. We had conversations about blockchains. These are all the technologies that emerge as a result of fourth industrial revolution. So when we speak about the digital mapping of the humanities at now, we speak about these advanced technologies that we bring about. These are important for us because their integrations, much as they are complicated, as my colleagues has alluded, they also are showing us how to best conceptualize our respective disciplines so that we can use these technologies as complements. I do it in terms of ethics, in terms of philosophy, but I imagine that somebody that is doing, for example, digital anthropology, they will look at YouTube as a domain of investigation and apply it there. Somebody that does linguistics will want to look at a grammatical system and how to design them so that you can develop a code that can be written in your own indigenous language. Somebody at languages can use it for translating purposes. Political scientists and political theorists need to create governance models that provide the necessary governance structures that we need for these types of technologies. So these technologies are there, and because they're created by us, we have a bigger responsibility of ensuring that because we've created them, we need to find ways in terms of regulating them. In the way that we use them in teaching and learning and research spaces should be to complement our own functions. So that's how we should use them necessarily, and that's how they value in terms of humanities. So in conclusion, what I want to argue here is that what I'm emphasizing, colleagues, is that AI presents exciting opportunities for humanities. I've deliberately removed the notion of challenges. It provides opportunities for humanities, and by embracing it in an interdisciplinary and collaborative manner and considering the implications that it comes with, we can harness the power of AI to enrich our research and in teaching and research. It is for this reason that the humanities should be at the forefront of leading this charge, just as we're seeing here with UNISA, with the summit, and with our colleagues at Nelson Mandela University in terms of what we're doing. I'm doing it in terms of ethics. I encourage everybody to do it in terms of their respective fields. Thank you so much, colleagues, and don't forget to change the world.
Thanks, Karabo. Questions, colleagues? Let's open up the floor of questions. I think this is where everyone asked ethics questions yesterday, morality. So unless you had all your answers ethically responded to yesterday, Derek, please go ahead. Can we get a microphone to Derek? Thanks.
Lovely presentation, and I like the way of framing it around dignity. Just a question. Have you ever looked at actor network theory and seen if that fits at all with autonomous, what was it, your autonomous moral, I can't remember it, but I'd be interested to see if Bruno Latour's actor network theory kind of has any articulation with your thinking.
Yeah, I don't remember the last time I did Bruno Latour, but I think if it speaks about network theory, then it would have an impact with autonomous weapon systems. But I think one of the bigger challenges with autonomous weapon system outside of the object-specific metaphysics that he argues for is always the problem of the frame. So the question of autonomy as it's presented in terms of tech definitions of autonomy speaks about capacity to act, which is one directional notion of autonomy. But autonomy in terms of conscious definitions, for example, in terms of how the cognitive system works, is that feedback type system where it's not only the capacity of action, but also the capacity to will and defy an action. So I think in that regard, it would have some kind of impact, but I imagine it's something that I would have to look into in much more detail to give a much more educated response.
Question here on this side. Okay, one, two, three. Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you, Karabo. It's Michael again. I'm in a college of education. I'm dealing with pedagogy and stuff. Dignity. In your presentation, you indicated that the robots is autonomous moral agents. How then, according to Asimov, the three robotics laws, which one apply to that one? Because you said that the robots is now moral agents. And Asimov indicated that you can instruct a robot, by the way, program the robot to be your pet or be your social partner and so on. How are you addressing that? What Asimov in his principles of the three laws of robotics will you address in your research? Did you see is a valid point that you can deepen your research in that one and maybe critique that particular law of Asimov? Thank you.
Okay, we can take 3, 1, 10, right?
Yeah.
Let's go number 2 and then the last one.
Thank you, Karabo. My name is Moneti. I'm from the Department of Philosophy, Practical and Systematic Theology. I just want to ask you possibly two questions, and with regards to ethics and humanity and dignity in AI. What could be the ethical consideration that should be taken into account when using AI to study human behavior? And also, what are the metaphysical beliefs? And how do we respect and ensure to respect for diverse philosophical perspective regarding AI and research? Thank you.
Thanks. What moving presentation, Karabo. My name is Arun from UNISA. The slide on autonomous moral agents, very interesting. How do you think that is disrupting the knowledge, indigenous knowledge systems? Thanks.
Okay, can we take the last one, please? The last one.
Thank you. I think actually my question builds up on the last question, but I think for me then, when we talk about having dignity, I don't, so I'm just thinking, just bear with me. I'm thinking about the concept of dignity as somebody who has dignity, right? But that having dignity and giving something dignity doesn't necessarily mean that that thing needs to have dignity of its own, right? And I'm just thinking about it in terms of historically, through many, many different cultures, groups, objects have been given even sometimes human, I don't want to say human value, but the same respect that you would give to a person, right? Those objects, whether they represent an elder, an ancestor, through use value, right? The more we use objects, the more we tend to consider them part of our lives, right? In the same ways we would even consider pets as part of the family. And I'm trying to think about this insistence of abstracting technology as something that we need to keep it over there. And we can't give it the kinds of values that we give other objects if we use them enough in our daily life, right? What is it about technology that we are so scared of it that we have to conceptualize how it doesn't have dignity, how it doesn't have moral agency, but other objects don't need to have those things in order to be given dignity, in order to be treated well, in order to be taken care of, in order to be valued. And I was thinking about this, that when I walked in, I think yesterday evening when we left, and I was looking at the robot at the back and it was kind of hunched over. And I felt like, I was like, and then I was thinking about he who shall not be named, who has released robots, and there was a celebrity who was kicking the robot on a live stream, right? The robot would stand up and they would kick it, and the robot would stand up and they would kick it. And how, and I was just thinking of the kinds of like reactions that people had to this, where they were like, no, you can't do that, that's not right, right? But, and let me leave it there. Sorry.
Thank you so much for all the questions. I'm going to try my best to respond to all. Please remind me if I've missed any of them. So I think I want to start by highlighting there's a concept called anthropomorphism, right? So this concept says we ascribe specific human qualities to instruments that we use because of the value that they relate to us. Now, this would mean on a low level that when I drive my car, I like my car very well. I says she drives fast. She's very loyal. I'm very protective of her. No one touches her, just me. That's my car, right? I've ascribed these human values to this car, and because of it, there's a way in which I treat this car that is based on those human values. Does it mean anything for the car? No. And it speaks to that metaphysical conversation that I want to get to. Does it mean anything to the car itself? No. Does it mean something to me as an entity ascribing these qualities? Yes. So ascription can be for the purposes of the entity itself or for the purposes of my relation to the entity. So that's the notion of anthropocentrism. And what that means in terms of the metaphysical implications, for example, is that the values themselves mean nothing to the entity for itself, but it means something to the way in which we experience the entity. It speaks about our phenomenological experience to these specific entities. Now, does that mean that then we should democratize giving them the specific qualities that we should? Yes and no. Remember, the conception of providing one quality or the other comes with the consequences of dessert, not the cake, that which an entity deserves. So when I say something is a person, how I treat the something should be based on its personhood. And these are the qualities that are prescribed. So if it's a person, it must have rights. It must be treated with dignity. So I will buy a robot vacuum cleaner, give it the status of personhood, it can decide not to clean. Because the status goes beyond the function of the technology. But this speaks to something very important about our relationship with technology, is that we, as the people who are creators of the moral environment, prescribe the rules of engagement that we want to do. The reason why it's difficult, Dr. Dlamini, in terms of technologies these days, is because of their conceptual disruption. In the past, as instruments, we could ascribe a status and take it away because they were instruments. The moment we change their status to agents, for example, if you have a sex robot that is an agent, it means to have sex with that robot, you must get consent because it's an agent, it's not an instrument. As an instrument, you don't have to ask your car permission to drive it. But if your car is an agent, you need consent to drive it. It can choose not to. So these are the complications and the conceptual disruptions that these kinds of technologies create. That is why in terms of the laws of robotics, again, the way in which laws of robotics were created by Asimov is very anthropocentric. It speaks to how these technologies that we're creating should not damage us. It does not speak about the values of the technologies themselves. So the point that I always make is to say we need to make a decision on whether we want to ascribe qualities to entities, then they can be instruments. But if we want to accept that they can be agents, then it means the question of their qualities is no longer a question of ascription, it's a question of desert. So then we owe it some types of qualities. So those are the complicated things that is there. And then that has many implications. Metaphysically, it challenges our notion of reality. I mean, for the longest of time, we've accepted Plato's conception of concepts as a meta-universe that exists. But the very same people that accepted the meta-universe existing from Plato's conceptions are very averse to the metaverse. And that doesn't make sense to me because conceptually it's the same thing. It's this conceptual thing that exists outside of what we call reality, which some would think is practical, some would think is not. So I think maybe in summary, in trying to answer all the questions, one, it's conceptual disruption, that technologies that start speaking about human-based qualities start disrupting it. It starts with something like artificial intelligence. Intelligence is a cognitive function. Moral agency. Agency is a human function. And because of these concepts and how they are used in the tech world, they're disrupting what we used to enjoy as our own privileges. And I think what that does in terms of indigenous knowledge systems is that indigenous knowledge system conceptually speaks about knowledge system in relation to other knowledge systems. I think in South Africa, knowledge systems are knowledge systems, and as South Africans, what we hold as arbiters of knowledge is knowledge. Indigenous becomes the relative conversation that we have in terms of other conceptions that we do. But what happens in terms of these technologies and how their impact will have on us is based on the status that we want to ascribe them. If they're instruments, then all the legal systems that exist can provide the necessary protections out of them. But the moment we explore the notion of them being possible agents, then there's a conceptual disruption that happens that creates this discomfort that we see. Thank you. Can I go? Yes. I want to go.